CBSE Board, Class 11, History, Chapter 4, Part 28. This video is created by Renee Matthew. We need to look at the reforms from 1978. The reforms were initially started by Deng Xiaoping, who was a person who introduced a socialist market economy, and they declared its goal as a four modernization. And we also saw that they wanted to bring about a change in all these segments of the society: develop science, industry, agriculture, defense. They understood that these were the basic elements which will promote the country as a whole, and that is why they wanted to promote it. So debate was allowed as long as the party was not questioned. Earlier, nobody was even allowed to stand in groups or even discuss about anything. But now, as long as the party was not questioned, as long as people did not pose a threat to the party, people were allowed to even debate amongst themselves. That was not a problem at all. Look at this picture. In this new and liberating climate, so now the climate or the atmosphere, climate doesn't mean the literal climate, the weather, but it actually indicates that at this time when the atmosphere was more liberating, when it was new, when people were touched by novel ideas at this time, there emerged the May 4th movement 60 years earlier. It was an exciting explosion of new ideas which took place 60 years back with lot of new ideas. And on 5th December 1978, there was a wall poster which was called the Fifth Modernization. Of course, it was highlighting all these parts, segments which will have to be improved and established. The other modernizations would come to nothing. So, concerning this particular poster, it cannot be compared to any other novel ideas. It was the best. It was the best shot that the party wanted to establish in. Of course, it faced a lot of criticism, especially criticizing the Communist Party for not solving the problem of poverty. Because when you give importance to all these five segments, the problem of poverty is still there. And it was not ending, it was not putting an end to sexual problems, sexual exploitation. And of course, still cases of abuse was very prevalent in the society. So these three problems were there, which is a part of inequality. When they are trying to solve something, this critics told that you have to solve the problem of poverty, exploitation, sexual exploitation, and also put away with the cases of abuse, especially from within the party. There shouldn't be any case of all these things within the party that was happening. When the party was striving forward to put an end to everything, within the party itself there were a lot of examples for these three cases. But still these demands were suppressed. They did not encourage these kind of revolts. And in 1989, on the 70th anniversary of the May 4th movement, just now we saw that the May 4th movement took place 60 years back. So on the 70th birth anniversary of May 4th movement, many intellectuals called for a greater openness. They said we have to go for a greater revolt. We will have to be really open with our viewpoints and our perspectives, and we have to express our needs in a better way with more open-endedness. And it was an end to ossified dogmas. Su Shaozi. Ossified dogmas should not be encouraged. Okay. Student demonstrations also took place at Tiananmen Square in Beijing. Of course, they were brutally challenged. The students were suppressed, repressed, and it was strongly condemned around the world. They said we are not going to involve the students to have demonstrations against the party. So look at these two pictures. The post-reform period, of course, saw the emergence of many debates on ways to develop China. So as a part of developing the political side of China, there was a reform period which saw the emergence of debates. People wanted to put up debates and debate on what really could be done with the political side, with the social side, with the religious side. The dominant view supported by the party, this particular view which is supported by the party, is entirely based on strong political control, economic liberalization and integration into the world market. So whatever change that they were going to bring about will be based on politics, economic liberalization and integration with the world market, because without the market, where is the progress in the economy? Still, the critics were arguing. They did not give up. They said that in spite of all these changes that you're going to bring about, there is still increasing inequalities between social groups. Still, there is prevalence of inequality. Where has the inequality disappeared? Especially between regions, between men and women. It was creating a lot of social tension even within the families. And there was a great question on the heavy emphasis on the market. So critics were telling that when there are a lot of other problems which are still there to be resolved, you are completely putting your focus, you're just focusing on the market. Where is the solution for the basic inequality which is experienced between regions, between men and women? You shouldn't talk of the market when there are more better, or you can say more problems of priority which has to be resolved. Finally, there is a growing revival of earlier so-called traditional ideas. So because of all this criticism, there was an immediate need. It was like the government was forced to revive all these things and also to put away with the traditional ideas. Of course, you may ask, all these philosophers and reformers were only talking about this for the past 10 years, but nobody gave ears to it. But now it was the final stand to put an end to the old non-pragmatic traditional ideas, especially of Confucianism and arguments that China can build a modern society following its own traditions. That was actually a wrong statement, rather than simply copying the West. Okay, so they have to bring in the good points or the merits from all the spheres of learning, and then only they can build their country, was the final stand. Now we need to look into the story of Taiwan. Chiang Kai-shek defeated by the Communist Party. This person was defeated by the Communist Party and he fled in 1949 to Taiwan. Okay, and he had some money also with him. US dollars, 300 million US dollars he had in gold reserves. And he had crates of priceless art treasures. With all these things, he ran away and he escaped to Taiwan. And there he established the Republic of China. Now, Taiwan also had a Japanese colony since the Chinese ceded it. After the 1894-95 war with Japan, there was a colony which came up in Taiwan. The Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation restored sovereignty to China. So because of these two movements, there was some sovereignty to China which was established, and in spite of Taiwan having a Japanese colony, they were able to have better communication with China because of the Cairo Declaration and Potsdam Proclamation. Still, there were a lot of massive demonstrations which took place in February 1947. It led the GMD to brutally kill a whole generation of leading figures. Many people were killed, not only common people but also leaders. The GMD under Chiang Kai-shek went on to establish a repressive government. He was interested in putting up a very dictatorial, repressive, suppressive government which will put an end to any form of oppression. He forbid free speech. He did not allow his people to express themselves. And political opposition, he was completely against that. And he excluded the local population from position of war. Anybody who took over or who was a part of the government was not going to be a part of the local population, and they were completely excluded. He forbid them from free speech and political opposition. They carried out a lot of land reforms. And these land reforms increased the agricultural productivity. It modernized the economy. So by 1973, Taiwan had GNP second only to that of Japan in Asia. So agricultural productivity was increased, and a result of this modernized economy, Taiwan was just second to Japan in Asia, it just went down. The economy was largely dependent on trade. Of course, that is a very big fact. And it was steadily growing also. But what is very important is that there was a great gap between the rich and poor. And that was steadily declining. There was a big gap, and that gap was actually decreasing. Now people were going to be seen in equal terms, because that was a major problem. Okay, and many people were not allowed to even see what is happening in the government. Only when you have representatives from the common people, they will have an idea of what is really happening in the government and where their money is going. And there was something which was very dramatic during those times. It was a transformation of Taiwan into a democracy. So Taiwan slowly transformed itself into a democratic nation. A democratic government, sorry. It began slowly after the death of Chiang. So after the death of Chiang only they were able to put up with this democracy. And then after the death of Chiang, it gained momentum when martial law was lifted. All these kind of martial laws, because he was a bit strict. We saw that he wanted to establish a repressive government, and opposition parties were legally permitted by now. Because they understood that if you have to grow, we should have opposition, we should have criticism. Without criticism, nobody will be able to even grow. The first free elections began the process of bringing local Taiwanese to power. So the first free elections allowed people from Taiwan to come into power. And diplomatically, many countries will have only trade missions in Taiwan. They just wanted to have diplomatic trade missions with Taiwan, not something very formal and not something very staunch. Full diplomatic relations and embassies were not possible, as Taiwan is considered to be part of China. So diplomatically, only other parts of the world wanted to establish trade relationship with Taiwan, because it was still a part of China. And now we saw that it had opened more access to be a part of China. Earlier that was not there, but now it was directly under China. Now came the question of reunification. With the mainland remains a contentious issue, but cross-strait relations, that is between Taiwan and China. Which part is going to be unified with China? What are the bonds that you're going to develop because of this unification? How it is going to be united with the mainland of China? Whether it is going to be united? All these questions came up. It was improving, and there was this Taiwanese trade and investments on the mainland. They were connected with the mainland of China. It was massive, and travel also became easier because of all these things. So now we can see that Taiwan, more or less, it unified with the mainland of China. So China will be willing to tolerate a semi-autonomous Taiwan. It was willing to tolerate semi-autonomous. Look at that statement. It did not want Taiwan to have fully autonomous or completely independent kind of decision making or democracy. They wanted Taiwan to partially depend on them as long as it gives up any move to seek independence. So they did not want Taiwan to even seek independence or come up with the idea of having that independent rule. They allowed Taiwan to just be semi-autonomous. Two roads to modernization is the next segment. So industrial societies started springing up. There was a lot of competition between the industries by now, and they found their own paths to becoming modern instead of depending on the government. Now these industrial societies had enough money to develop on their own without completely depending on the government. Earlier they depended on the government for their development. When we look at the history of both Japan and China, it shows us two different angles, because China was under colonization from the foreigners. But Japan was not like that. Japan was able to build an empire, a colonial empire. So two different historical conditions made them to emerge as independent and modern nations. It's only because of two different experiences, as if two different people are experiencing. One was a colonial power itself, and the other one was it was submerged under colonization. But the path to modernization, the path to independence was totally different. It took two divergent paths, both China and Japan. That is very important. And Japan was really successful in retaining its independence. It was able to retain its independence. And also it used its traditional skills and practices in new ways. This point will have to be discussed in a more broader sense in the upcoming videos. So stay tuned for that.